All right, so last week we started our series, Proof for the Existence of God. And today we're continuing with part 2 of that. And we talked about the relevancy of the issue. And last week I presented 3 main proofs for God's existence: the natural evidence, the teleological evidence, the cosmological evidence. And then we closed last week by asking the question, if God exists, then what? And concerning the relevancy, we talked about the fact that we struggle in hard times. And so it's important, as we go through hard times, to know why we believe that God exists, because your emotions can overcome the truth of the fact that God exists and He's sovereign and He's powerful in your life. Then we talked about the problem of evil. Usually people will say, well, if God exists, why is there evil? Why is there suffering? It's what philosophers call theodicy, the issue of evil. If God exists, then why do you allow such things to happen? And then, many times, people will excuse why they don't want to walk with God, because as far as they're concerned, well, if God exists, then where's He at? I can't see Him, I can't touch Him, I can't feel Him. So since I can't see God and feel God and touch God, I'm not going to believe that He exists. And I'm going to basically live the way that I want to live. Also, many times we call ourselves theists. Theist meaning we believe in God, but we live like atheists. We act as if God doesn't exist, but yet many times we say that we believe that God exists. And so that many times is a contradiction. And so we need to settle the issue. Do we believe that God exists? And if He does, then it needs to apply into our lives. It needs to transform the way we feel and think and behave and treat other people. Concerning the natural evidence, in Romans 1, Paul said the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. So he basically said people are suppressing the truth about God because of their wickedness. That is, the truth is facing them every single day, but because people are wicked, many times they suppress. And that Greek word is an active word. It means to constantly try to hold something down that's, in a sense, active and dynamic. So the truth of God is constantly speaking to people, but they come up with all these excuses because of their wickedness. That is, wickedness meaning we want to live our lives the way we want to. A lot of times we will try to suppress that truth. And in Romans 1 verse 19, Paul the apostle says, since what may be known about God is plain to them, what is known about God is plain to people. That God is just plain. He makes Himself visible. He makes His invisible self visible through visible properties. Since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. He says, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. So Paul says, look, God's invisible qualities, His divine nature, is clearly seen. The invisible God is seen through the visible painting, through the visible art of creation. You know that Picasso exists because you see Picasso's painting. So Paul says, through natural evidence, God has made it plain to all humans since the beginning of time. That's why when you study anthropology, you realize that people have always been worshipers of the gods or God. People are naturally theists. They may be into voodoo, they may be into Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, but bottom line, people have always looked to higher powers through the history of time, going back to the first civilization that we know of in Egypt. So Paul says God has made His eternal power and divine nature clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified Him as God nor gave thanks to Him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. So people naturally knew God, but their hearts became futile and wicked. So our hearts can affect our intellect and what we know. And then we talked last week about the teleological evidence, and basically the word telos comes from the Greek word end or purpose. When such arguments speak of the universe being ordered, they mean that it is ordered towards some end or purpose. Basically what this means is that the universe seems to have a design and a purpose to it. Many Jewish philosophers don't even ask the question, does God exist? The question a lot of Jewish philosophers ask is, why do we exist? What's our purpose? Because unless you can answer that question, you'll never get to the issue as to God exists. Because once you answer the question, why we exist, what is our purpose? And as you think through that question and you don't have any solid answers, you basically are living a life with no meaning because you don't even know your purpose. You're like a refrigerator that doesn't even know you're supposed to be plugged into the wall and provide protection and longevity to food and drink. So the teleological evidence is the fact that everything in creation seems to have a design for a particular purpose. Your human body parts seem to have a purpose and a design. To create life, to experience relationships, to build. Genesis talks about God has given man and women dominion over the earth, that you are called to rule and to do things in this world. So the teleological evidence seems to show that everything in this world, including flies, seem to be constructed in a way that they have a purpose. The cosmological evidence we talked about last week is an argument for the existence of a first cause. Basically, if the Big Bang Theory is true and the universe came to exist at a point of time, the question becomes, who or what initiated that initial force that took matter and energy, according to the Big Bang theorists, and created the universe. And it ordered the universe in specified language and complexity so that everything in a fine-tuned way operates. It's what we call the anthropic principle. Everything seems to be operating in a fine-tuned, precise way. The distance of the earth from the sun, the human body parts, your DNA. Everything seems to have structure, language. Well, the question becomes, who pushed that first domino? Because one thing we know from philosophy is that something never comes from nothing. It's impossible. It's a logical absurdity. Something always has to come from something. So you can't say that it came from nothing, because based on logic and science, it doesn't make any sense. It actually violates scientific laws. Science is based on the law of causality, which means that every effect has a cause. Every effect has a cause. And when you get into like quantum physics and mechanical theory, things need a first cause, something to initiate motion. Thomas Aquinas, the great Catholic philosopher, there was the mic, the great Catholic philosopher talked about the unmoved mover, God. The being that no one has ever moved, that always existed, who initiates existence. Think about that, how awesome God is. He's the uncaused cause, according to Thomas Aquinas. So the cosmological evidence is based on the law of cause and effect. This is a law, that every effect needs a cause. And so the question becomes, something had to exist in order to put that first